Hello everyone, my name is Cassandra, and I am a Death Keeper in the practice of sacred geometry. Today, I wanted to cover three main points that I mentioned in my last video, in my introduction, to kind of elaborate on and explain who I am, where I came from, where I'm coming from, and how I got here. And I figured the three best ways I can do that is by explaining very briefly a little bit about sacred geometry itself. That's a question I get asked usually first. Then I want to talk about Cassandra's complex and how that exists and what that is, since that's also a story that not everybody knows. And finally, I'm going to end on another point I said about how I'm not white by conventional standards. And I'll know that probably threw a lot of people looking at me because I'm practically clear. But it has to do with our history. And the reason I'm kind of going in these three subjects today is because they connect to each other. And they're going to tell a story that not a lot of people know. A lot of people who look like me don't know these things, don't understand these things. And I hope that by doing this, I can also show where the bridges once were. So, settle in with me for a moment. I've got a story for you. And we're going to start with sacred geometry. So what is sacred geometry? To put poetically, it is the math, science, and art of what man calls God and what we call source. To put less poetically, it is the patterns, the formulas, the structures, the biology, all of the patterns that make up this world and creation and the stars and your eyes and everything. The pattern that Source used to create these things. And it's advanced pattern recognition to really do the study of this subject. Another thing that throws people off about this is when I say sacred geometry, people are inclined to think I am talking about a religion, and it is not a religion. There's a quote out there that goes, when you take science and spirituality and you put them together, you will make more progress in the next 10 years than you made in the last 2,000 years. And I entirely believe that. And I've seen it. I've seen technology that used the principles of sacred geometry without calling it that, without knowing that's what they were doing. And as somebody who studies and researches this, I am very familiar with those patterns, the shapes, how they work, what they mean, what we learned from them. For example, one of the more common things that I think anybody who's been in the public school system remembers is the Venn diagram, the two circles with the overlap in the middle of them. Well, in sacred geometry, that shape, that pattern, has a name, and it's called the Vesica Pisces. And what it actually is the first shift that Source made when it was creating reality. Essentially, taking its most creative forces and its most destructive forces and separating them and seeing if they could work together in that overlap to create something better. I wish I had a way to kind of clip show some of these patterns, so you'll have to forgive me until I find a way or a person who knows tech. But Perhaps one day I'll crack open my grimoire and share with you what I mean. Because I do have all of this stuff written down myself. That was sacred geometry. And it tells the proportions of length, width, depth, which gives you light. It also carries in it the information for the square roots of 2, 3, and 5, if I remember correctly, all of which are infinite. And it is a spiritual and scientific endeavor to follow the truth wherever it goes and learn from it. To learn from nature. To learn from life. To learn from ourselves. To learn from patterns. From the changing of the seasons to the growing of the fields. Sacred geometry is unity in practice. And when people get twisted off about what they're looking at, this is how you end up with the divisions in the world that we see today. This is how you end up with religion. See, in my world, the reason why no nation currently has an ability to address its problems is because it looks at this world in only 3 scopes: money, politics, religion. And growing up, I was told these are the 3 things you never talk about in polite conversation, because if you did, you'd find out how full of shit each one of them were. For example, money. Why do we pay to exist when we do not choose to be born here? Something to think about. If the entire world is in debt to so much, who do we owe that money to? Mars? Venus? Jupiter? Or is it just each other as we play this bizarre game of Monopoly with each other and pretend like our resources aren't finite? Politics can speak for itself now. I really don't need to give any more voice to that one, and I'm pretty sure I made myself clear where I stand, especially as a trans woman in this country who is not white. We'll get there. But religion is the tough one. Tough for a lot of people, because that's the one in your heart. That's the one that gets you in the feels. It binds people to their communities. It creates a sense of belonging. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but most religions in this world not only are not what you think they are, but they're not even original. And it's just the politicization of your spirituality. For a lot. For the very, just the overarch of religion as a whole. It is a institutionalization of spirituality. The way I tell people this to help them shake free of a lot of those tethers is that spirituality comes from within. Religion is without. It's without rules. It's without its own stopgaps. It's without limits. It's without expectations. It's without everything. Because it's an idea that is institutionalized into dominating and controlling people's lives. Now, I know people really go deep in a lot of ways about their faiths, but I challenge those people to say, would your faith still exist if religion didn't? And if it does, then that's probably spirituality and not religion. Because, fun fact, and why I can't really be nice about this subject when it comes to religion specifically, is because I'm a witch. They boiled us. They invented new torture tools just to make us confess, to confess love for their devils, the devils that they already invented in their hearts. When they saw someone like a Baba Yaga, or the Morrigan, or a Kali, there's a lot more to that story too. And for now, I'm going to move on to Cassandra's complex. Because this is something that I was born into, and I didn't know. I wasn't allowed to know. Just like I wasn't autistic, or I wasn't allowed to consider that there were forces and things at work in my life that were out of my control. For some folks, they're probably going to think, how is that possible? How is it possible for a person to not know something so valuable about themselves? And the answer to that question is because the things that I knew were not received by the people around me. Carl Jung spent a great portion of his life researching people exactly like me. He did it because he himself felt a difference. He saw a pattern that was happening, and he pursued a life in psychology. And I'm not gonna lie, the man saved my life in more ways than I know. Because he's one of the few recordings that we have of someone who was studying us. And what do I mean by us? What was so different about someone like me that it got the eye of Carl Jung and made him devote his life to writing about us? And it comes from the term that he coined called Cassandra's complex. A term that actually got popularized when I was a kid in the movie 12 Monkeys, which I think might have been pretty hard reason why some of us found ourselves and researched those words, and why others saw that and thought it was just a movie trope, and that we were somehow deluding ourselves, essentially. Because I also grew up in the 90s, and there's a big story about that one too, and what that was like, and every other millennial / elder millennial out there knows exactly what I'm talking about, especially if you didn't have money in your pockets and you were living in places where a lot of other people weren't like you. And that's going to go into my next story in a moment. But for now, we're talking about Cassandra. Because Cassandra was, however you want to look at it, a Grecian prophet. She comes from Greece. Way back in the day, it said that a woman named Cassandra was born with the gift of foresight, blessed by the gods, specifically a god named Apollo. He gave her the gift of foresight, and he chased her. Well, depending on the version of this story, you'll either hear that Apollo chased after Cassandra with his gifts and his attentions, and Cassandra didn't reciprocate, and so he cursed her. You'll also hear stories, though, that tell the same thing, except that instead of Cassandra just not being interested, she deserved the curse because she dared to spurn Apollo's advances. And how familiar does that story sound, ladies? The curse that she inherited for spurning Apollo's advances was that she would be able to see the future, but she would be unable to do anything about it. She would have to watch these horrific things plague her mind. And then when she would go to tell her friends and family, they wouldn't believe her. They said she was crazy. They said she was making it up. She was doing it for attention. They gave her all the reasons that I have heard in my life. And many other people just like me who might be hearing these words are starting to realize too. They heard it as well. And so when Cassandra's visions would play out, the people rejected her more. They said she was the cause of it. They blamed her for trying to help, for trying to stop people from running like lemmings off a cliff. And this went on for years. Years of Cassandra's life spent in her town, suffering these visions and suffering more with the indignities of her community that didn't understand her and didn't listen to her. Community that beat her mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Until one night, Cassandra has a vision that her village is going to burn to the ground. And she runs out of her home that night screaming at the top of her lungs, "Please, everybody leave. We're all going to die. The village is going to burn. We have to get out of here." And of course, everybody who heard Cassandra screaming and raving and losing her mind in the street, they scorned her again. They ignored her and they went back to sleep. And then the fire came and everybody died except for Cassandra. When the local Sporoi militia, pick a name, doesn't matter, when the neighbors came to see what had happened, they found Cassandra driven horribly insane in the ashes of her home, clawing at her eyes. She was lost. And the accounts that I heard, I grew up with, I learned, so that she was interned in Delphi. And for anybody who knows about that wretched place, where the oracles of Delphi were basically corralled and used, tragic. Tragic that the one person who wanted to do more for everyone else than they ever wanted for themselves, who only ever tried to use their gifts for others, was rejected so thoroughly. That story wasn't just a story, and it was prolific. Because the truth is, and the truth about spirituality and all of this, is we're all in it together. It's not different races. The cultures are different, sure. Food, music, art. These things are different, and that's good. But we are one human species. And the thing about a Cassandra is that they're not limited to Greece. We're not freaks or genetic weirdos or anything like that. And we have a lot of people who pretend to do and say what we do and say. And the difference, as my new favorite band, Chasing Abby, would tell you, is you could tell by the walk, you could tell by the smile, you could tell by the smell. You can tell which one of us have that spark and which one of us is faking it. Something in my practice we call leading a false revolution. Different subject entirely. Circle back to that one day. But in the story of Cassandra, and the reason why I'm telling you that we are not just from Greece, that we weren't just white people, or we're not just 1%. We represent a function in humanity as a whole, and we pop up everywhere, in every country, in every story. We are all over the place. Trans people too, all over the place. Even if you don't see us all the time, and even if we are still a very small minority, we're all over this world. So are our footprints, and so is our history. Carl Jung coined that phrase, Cassandra's complex, because he was finding patients in his work, seeking them out, because we struggle enough as it is. And in his day, it was so much worse when it came to psychology. I mean, at least people were kind of thinking about it and working. But 1942 to 1945, need I say more? He saw us. He gave us the name, Cassandra's Complex. He studied us. He worked with us. He tested us. He tested our insights. And what he found were more stories. What he found was a common human thread. I'm going to double back for a second to my previous, because I said all of these points I have for you today all kind of roll in together. And why I'm not a religious girl, spiritual AF, sure. I got my patrons, and they don't all always make sense. And I've got stories that would make your head spin. But the weird thing when it came to this life and the works of Carl Jung and studying sacred geometry is that when you study the concept of religion itself, you find that you have cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, all telling the same stories. What one man calls Yahshua, another one calls Yahweh, another one calls Muhammad, another one calls Perseus, another one calls Agrippina, or Agrippus, or whatever the hell his name was. Like, the stories are all over this world, and they're all the same, with different cultural lenses. So if that's true, how does that happen, and why? And the answer is because they're all looking at the same thing, and it's that big empty sky right over your head when the sun sets and you can see the stars and the gods and the constellations and the titans and the mythos and the stories and the Quetzalcoatl's and whatever it is. It's just our relationship with sacred geometry. The stars are some of the purest expressions of that. And so we wrote stories about them and mythologized them and gave them human faces so that our human experiences didn't feel so lonely. Like maybe one of those gods would be on our side. And then we went and invented entire civilizations that bludgeoned each other over their heads over who got the right one. More on that story too. So now I want to get to the tough one. The one that's not for everybody here. And the one I feel like might take the most explaining. Why I'm not white. Because see, that term originates from the days of the melting pot, thing that we did here in America. And it actually starts before that, during the slave trade days. And my background, Irish, German, Norwegian, knows a very different story about this world. For example, my Norwegian ancestors took up the trade of Vikings and sacked the world. They met up with my German ancestors in the Black Forest and apparently got along well between the fighting. Some of them settled. And my Germanic ancestors, living in the Black Forest, the tribes of the Goths, sacked Rome because they called them barbarians. Yeah. That's kind of why that happened. The Romans were racist to my German ancestors and to everybody that was north of the wall. And since we didn't share the same beliefs that they did, we didn't have the same, desire to roll over and die, we laid siege to Rome and we trapped them inside of their walls. And they starved to death. And they died of plague and pestilence. We didn't have to lift a finger. We just told them to stay on their side of the line. Until the doors creaked open and my ancestors strolled in and saw Rome was a shithole. And there wasn't even anything worth taking. Anybody with a sense in their head during that time had already rolled off to the Holy Roman Empire in the East, which hadn't been called that yet, but Constantine was thinking about it. That empire, that section, they were worried because they thought the barbarian hordes from the north would be coming for them next. And we didn't, because we didn't want that. And then, of course, some time passes, and eventually my Germanic ancestors, somehow, I suppose through the Gauls, managed to make it into Ireland. And from there, my great prescient grandfather, some other time, saw an opportunity to get to America, and that's what they did. And that's a pretty abridged story of that. But the reason why I'm telling it, and the reason why I'm saying nobody with my complexion should be calling themselves white anymore, is because that was a term given to us so that the people who were abusing us would stop abusing us and we could find somebody else to abuse who didn't look like us. That was the melting pot. It wasn't to assimilate all of the cultures of the world. It was to get all the white people together, make them forget about their past, their history, their struggles, their feuds, their wars, okay? And come together against the many more other people who don't share our complexion. Part of the reason why this rings so hard for me is because of that lineage I just told you, Irish, German, Norwegian. Because before the days of colonization, there was the days of conquest. There was the days of feudalism and expansion. Even my Norwegian ancestors managed to travel great breadths of the lands, of the oceans. Some even made it to the Americas first, supposedly. And it's crazy too, because there's native stories I've heard that talk about my tribal ancestors coming from the north on long dragon-like ships, or however the stories were going. Prescient is what that was. But when it comes to the Irish side specifically, that's the one I take a lot of direct faith from, culture from, in a way, where I find my roots the most. Because something that people forget far too frequently, and it's very disturbing to see, especially within my own those camps, those three right there, Irish, German, Norwegian. The Irish were enslaved at one point. A lot of people forget that. They forget that before the colonizing of the Americas, the English were subjecting the Irish to slavery, indentured servitude or otherwise. We were treated as rats, red-haired, freckled-faced ginger freaks that needed to be punished as the undesirables and sins against the church, especially if you were a wood witch like me. And the first documented slaves in this country were Irish. They were white people. Because the struggle has never been about black versus white. It's always been about wealth, power, control, the rich versus anybody who wants a cut of what they have, of what they've hoarded. I know a lot of people will balk at that because they're like, what do you mean? And also, indentured servitude is not the same as slavery. Just go look. Go look at the graves. Go look at how they stole food from Ireland and called it famine and blight. And it disturbs me more than anything to know that there are Irish people who gleefully picked up that whip after it was used on us. And instead of going back to the plantation to free our people and burn that motherfucker to the ground, we used it on the next group. And that has to stop. Stop calling yourself white people. You're not white. European, Irish, German, Norwegian, French, Italian. Learn your roots. Learn the names on those graves. Learn where you actually came from. And don't flinch when you see something ugly. You call it out. Because you're not like that. Unless you are. And then I guess you're a white person, aren't you? See, another part of this, and I'm talking to white folks right now about this part. I suppose it helps others to understand how someone like me comes along. But let me explain. I grew up in Texas. My family is enormous. There's thousands of us all over this world. We all look the same right through here. Got a cousin in Portugal, got a cousin in Brazil, speaks Portuguese, and looks exactly like me. That is what my ancestry was able to do. That's how we spread across the world. Unfortunately, for me, and it pains me to say this every single time, but I have family that lives in Mississippi, and they're clan affiliated, and there's a lot of them. And it's disgusting that I have relatives like that. Relatives who think they're white, who think their money's going to save them, who thinks that they got their land and it's everybody else's fault that their lives are shit. The ones who took the whip and used it on the next group. That has to stop. And it has to end. And it doesn't end with us shouting at others. It ends when we turn all of that aggravation inward and we find out how we got here. Deprogramming, deconstructing, unpackaging. All of this stuff is stuff that is 2,000 years late. Because instead of doing that, we boiled people like me. So, there's a bit of abridged history for you. This is what we're working out. And the thing is that when you actually put the whips down, or you go back to the ones who put you in bondage in the first place, when you actually exercise self-determination instead of entrapment and slavery, when you break the system at its cores and its foundations and you let it fall over, stop, you don't help and pick it back up, you don't feed into it, you break it and build something new. You wait for it to fall in and you keep going, because what they're doing and what they told us and all that bullshit, it's the 80-20 split again, isn't it? That's why I didn't give up. That's why I'm still out here talking to everybody. Made my own flag, built my own house, did all these things just so that people like me had something that they could point at, a point of reference. They could have all the things that I didn't have, the things that I had to go learn and find out and fill in for myself. 90s kids, you know what you heard anytime you asked your parents to help you with something. I'll just go figure it out. You know, that might be good for like your first crush when you're trying to like ask them out on a date. Not really good on a break job, huh? It's too many of us that know that story. And I know Chris Titus is out there somewhere laughing, going, that's my story. Yeah, I didn't do the break job thing, but ooh, we got some similars. Because when you step out of all that and you get back into your own, you find your autonomy, you find your sovereignty, you find your roots, you find something worth your life. It's worth it. It's worth it to me to be like this, to have suffered 18 years of homelessness, mind you. Just to be able to tell all the racist fucks back home, I was right, you are wrong, and I won't apologize for that. There's one last thing that I want to note. A revisit from yesterday about how the truth doesn't care for our delusions, right? all of this grandstanding, who's on top, who's got it better, all this fucking trading shade, it doesn't matter. And when you let go of it, you're untouchable. Like, yeah, somebody could theoretically go out of their way to make your life hell. But what do they really have on you? I mean, I know more. I was right. The South is falling apart. Climate change is about to drown most of that coastline. I did my part. Cassandra was screaming, and you told me I was wrong. That's just how it goes. In sacred geometry, we call this a test of extinction. And this is going to rattle a lot of people. But the test of extinction is not a species-wide epoch type of thing. It's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about how in times of crisis, when the chips are really down and lives are on the line, will you, mind you, the person watching me right now, will you stagnate and suffer the catastrophe unchanged and thus go extinct? Or will you rise to the occasion and evolve? We know who's failing that test already. A lot of them. We know a lot of people who are already failing that test. We call them unreachables because there literally is nothing that a person like me could do to help them out short of building an empire and feeding and housing and giving them everything that they wanted and doing the things for everybody, and they would still bitch and moan about it because they never evolved. Versus how nature sorts this out, where when a species refuses to change or is incapable of changing, when they bottleneck into an idea or a state of being or a pattern or a diet even, I mean, take your pick, nature finds a way. And that test of extinction comes for everybody. See, the hardest part about this process is that because it happens to each of us individually, you can't look at anybody else and say, hey, could you help me out here? Because they're facing it too. Maybe you find someone like me who faces the test of extinction and is doing okay, and maybe we could give you some help, some tips, some tricks, whatever. But you still gotta do the work yourself. You still gotta run. Avoid the tidal wave, the magma flow, the fire, the tornado, whatever it is. You still gotta run. And that, my friends, is just life. And a lot of us, a lot of people got way too comfortable going to work and going to the club and going to a movie and hitting on the hot girl at the bar and all this other stuff. And like, life has always been so much more than just that. It's been more than political, it's been more than money, and it's been more than religion. It's been living and breathing around us every single waking moment of our lives. We are born into a machine that we cannot hear because it exists around us at birth. And it takes time, practice, introspection, learning to undo all of that. to hear the machine again, to know when the storm is coming, to know when the crops won't come in. My name is Cassandra. As I said, I am a death keeper. If you made it this far, thank you for your time. I know this one was quite long and there's a weird edit that I'm gonna try to figure out here. If it didn't work, it's a two-part, so you got a two-part. But yeah, and these are just a few of the things that, when I say we don't understand this world, it's not what we think it is. These are the things I'm talking about. I want to double back one last time to the white experience and to the person who divorces from the white experience. Many people know the story. Tell you what, let's just make that a whole other video. And hopefully by the end of that one, that story from the grave, you'll understand more why some of us just aren't white enough, and we never will be, and we never were. And that's great. It feels good, actually, to not be white, to be Irish, to be German, to be Norwegian. Hell, there's probably even some Polish and Native American in there too. And trust, I do want to meet with like council and be in those spaces, but look at me. They are remembered as well. As brethren, as kindred, not as other, and certainly not as my enemy, as was fed to white people when they realized they were outnumbered. Y'all stay safe out there. I'll try to get to work on this other video here pretty soon. Sorry this one's a mess. Had a lot going on today. As always, spells and blessings.